Well, we're here with Jed MacKay, and we're talking about his career at TV Ontario, and we're shifting gears now and moving towards Polka Dot Door. And Jed, you famously took over the mantle of producing this iconic show, and that's really an understatement. When I talk to I'm in my 30s, and when I talk to my friends, and when I talk to folks even 5, 10 years younger than me, it is without any further explanation. Anybody that grew up in Canada or Southern Ontario knows what Polka Dot Door is. But you took over the mantle from Ted Coneybeare in the 1980s, and you were charged with updating it and continuing its format. When did you take over exactly as producer, and why did you choose to do so?
Well, it was 85. Spring 85. I think we produced actually shot the shows maybe in June 85. So somewhere in there, I got I was asked if I wanted to produce it.
And was it Ted that called you and asked you?
No, it was Ruth. Ruth asked me if I wanted to. And I think Ted was retiring. Excuse me. Once again, to be honest, I never, you just don't know the inner workings when you aren't there. I was never there full time, so I didn't know the inner workings at all. My assumption was that Ted was going to retire. And I think I was probably told that, but I don't know. But I think that seems about right. I think he was going to retire, and so Ruth asked me if I wanted to produce. And at that point, I did. I'd done quite a bit of writing at that point and composing, and I was looking for the next thing to do, and it just fortuitously happened that Ruth made me that offer.
Did you take over directly from Ted? Was it literally the season before he had produced, and now this new 85 season you were doing?
I believe so. I'll say I think so. That's how I've always thought of it anyway.
We've talked before about Ted's phenomenal influence on Polka Dot Door, and on children's education for that matter, through Polka Dot Door. What things did he specifically establish in the show that you carried over?
Ted understood that not all kids that are watching the show are in similar circumstances, and that people tend to write from the circumstances they know. So if you're writing from, let's say, an upper middle class situation, you tend to assume everybody's living an upper middle class life, but they really aren't. Ted understood that completely. Ted was a genius at crafts and understanding how you could make things from Kleenex boxes and toilet tissue rolls, which is kind of one of the, sort of like a joke in a way for the show. But very true, it was very important on Polka Dot Door that everything you made, the crafts you made, could be made from things that would be found in virtually every household. It didn't require you to go buy anything. You're going to have a Kleenex box, you're going to have a toilet tissue roll, you're going to find some string and some Scotch tape, So that's why the crafts were built the way they were, to make it as accessible as possible to every child watching. Ted also made sure you never said, go ask a parent. You don't know, ask a parent. It was always ask a grown-up, because a lot of kids weren't living with parents. He never talked about your house, he always talked about your home. Because a lot of kids don't live in houses, and so forth and so on. So those are the things that I felt I loved about the show, and I thought were key to, keeping in the show.
What do you know about Ted as a person? Was your relationship with him always professional, or did you guys ever go out for drinks or dinner? What was he? Help me understand who he was as a person.
I can't be much help there. I learned more about him at that awards dinner a couple of years ago than I knew when they were introducing him. So, wow. And I read about him subsequently after he passed away. I'd say we're very friendly. I saw him every year for the shows. But we didn't socialize. I mean, he had everybody over for a drink, maybe once or twice or something. But I don't recall. We didn't, hang out, Tom.
Did you work with any other production crew who worked on the show with Ted in the early years that came on to you, that you inherited, I guess, as producer? And if so, how did they receive you as producer?
With great trepidation. No, I don't. That's not true. I don't think that's true. Maybe it is. Anybody who was on staff at TV Ontario would have crossed over. So the crew, camera guys, props, all those people just would have come on to the show when I came on. But I would attend. I always made a point of attending shows. I came to when shows are being shot that I'd written. I would go and watch, and I was really watching so I could understand better how to write better. I wanted to know what everybody needed to know in a script. How you've got to set it up and what makes it easier to shoot and all that sort of stuff. But so I did know. I knew crew people and the rest. But I didn't. I think that's pretty much it. I think I inherited anybody who was on staff, basically.
Very good. Did you have
David Moore directed virtually every episode of Polka Dot Door that I did, except for 1 year, I think, when he was doing another series, and Doug Williams, who then went on to join in, did. And David and Carol Jones, I think, who was my PA, I think the entire time. Carol's just indispensable person, wonderful person. Two of them, I think, came on it with me. The three of us were kind of, the tip of the Polka Dot Door iceberg when the new production group came in.
I've enjoyed corresponding with Carol, and we're actually going to talk this Wednesday night. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, I love her.
There were some things about the show that really, intentional or not, really became staples in the show. Obviously the four dolls, Humpty Dumpty, Bear and Marigold. You got Storytime Clock, Storytime Mouse. You got that treasure chest, the rocking chair, the opening animation, the closing animation. Was it anything ever communicated to you that, hey, you can't touch these things? You got it, or was it insinuated when you came on as producer that this is what it is, and I'm not going to mess with these things?
No, nothing was insinuated, and no one told me anything. That's one of the great things about working there in that era with Ruth. I think if I come in and say, I think we should really change the clock, I might have been, if I really felt strongly about it, it might have happened. But I felt all those things really worked, and I thought what was great about the show was sort of built more or less in 5-minute segments, and every segment had often its own little hook or its own, little something. The ritual of telling the time and doing the story. Kids love that. Kids love repetition. Kids love something they know. And the one very cool thing about Polka Dot Door, I thought, was they took a standard thing, but it always changed it up a little bit. So there's the clock. The clock apparently has the power to stop whatever is going on set. Chalk would chime, we'd stop, we'd have to go tell a story. It was a tremendously powerful thing. But the chime was always the same. And yet, the time was never the same. Storytime Mouse we always looked at Storytime Mouse. It was always something different with Storytime Mouse, whatever our link to the story was. The stories themselves could be acted out, could be just read, could be illustrations, eventually we started doing photo stories and, stuff like that. The door is always there. We're always going to zoom into the door. Back in Ted's day, it was either there were two dots, it was left or right, and you never knew which one you're going to go through. And I added a third one, so we had 3 dots. So you had all this repetition that's going on, and there's always this little element of a little different. And I think I loved that. I thought that was a genius aspect of the show from the get-go, and so I kept everything like that I liked.
Yeah, and when I think about my memory, those are things that I remember. Did you ever do anything creative where the hands on the clock were missing or something like that to lead into a segment?
I don't think we were that creative, Travis. I'm sorry. Now that you say that, I wish like heck we had. We were just on the cusp. We knew we were going to have to get into digital, and we were talking about how we were going to do that because 2:15 doesn't make any sense unless you know what 15, what does that mean? 2:15 is a time.
Right.
Unless you know that it means 15 minutes after the hour. You have to know that quartering of the hour.
Right.
And we've been talking about how we were going to show that on the clock. We were going to add a digital thing to the clock. That was coming. If we did another year, that would have been there.
Many of the things that we're talking about, the Storytime Clock, specifically the toys, Bear, Humpty Dumpty, Marigold, were all adapted from BBC's Play School. Mm-hmm. And I was curious to know, by the time that you came in 1985, were there, aside from the things that Polka Dot Door had been adapted from that show, were there any remaining ties to the BBC as far as you knew? Because I knew in the early days they were still using film that they would have imported, but at this point were you guys all on your own in terms of components of the show?
You know what, I don't even remember in 1975 that we were tied to BBC at all. I know that I was told I knew it was a BBC show, And I don't even know if they were using footage from BBC by then. Maybe they were. I can't remember. It's possible that Ted would say, well, we've got this film on how rubber boots are made, so let's use that. And, or look at some film list that we got from BBC and you could use it. I can't remember that.
Yeah,
we weren't looking at BBC at all.
The correspondence that I inherited from TV Ontario, they were very gracious to scan some things for me, seems to indicate that Play School was marketed for different countries as basically sets. So you could buy the rights to adapt it to your country, but part of the sets would be a list of films that they would have. And from what I understand from talking with Peggy Liptrot as well, some of the early scripts were purchased from the BBC and then to some extent rewritten and reworked for a Canadian audience. So I think that's where that came from.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing was Polkaroo was not part of the BBC show.
That's right.
It was a creation of, Dodie Robin, Pat Patterson, and Peggy Liptrot, I think. And that's a defining change. I mean, that makes the show different. And by the time it got to 75, 76, and certainly by the time it got to 85, the shows were, very, very different as far as I know. I don't even know if Play School's still on. I have no idea.
Was more on the topic of Polkaroo, was the costume pretty much the same through the time that you were there? I've recently found out from the photos that you provided me from 71 that indeed the costume looked, as one should expect, very different when it first donned the television in 71. The face looks the same, but obviously it was crafted differently. The costume, the material is a little bit different.
Yeah, we changed it certainly when I was producing. And there'd be a couple of reasons. One would just be the construction. The construction is very top heavy. It's hard on your neck. It's hard on your shoulders. How do you, over the years, people figured out ways to do that better. I think we altered the colors a little bit to make them fit more with the way we were redesigning the set. Nothing major. The whole idea of what we were doing was to try to integrate these changes in a subtle way over a number of seasons. So, because they were played in on air, things were interchanged back for years. The changes would happen relatively subtly, but by the end of probably the first 5 years I was doing it, I think we probably changed one or another. Almost everything was altered to some degree.
Now, was there an element of the Polkaroo costume that you inherited? I'm assuming it was probably one costume, maybe two. Was there an aspect of them getting worn out as well?
Yeah, and they'd always get fixed, or you could rebuild them, and rebuild them in a minor way. I don't know. When it comes to a major rebuild, I think we probably actually did the little redesigns when we had to do a complete rebuild because it disintegrated too much.
And one costume for the Polkaroo, or was there multiple ones available?
That's a good question. I can't remember. I'm trying to remember. Ethel Glinner did a lot of the stuff for us, and Misha Coast. So I'm not quite even sure who did it, to tell you the truth. We probably must have had two, but I don't remember that. You'd think we'd be crazy to have one.
Do you know by chance who the original designer of the Polkaroo costume was?
No.
What other new things did you add to Polka Dot Door during your time there? Now, you added another doll, a French-speaking cat.
No, that was added before. I think Ted added that.
Really?
I think that was in Ted's time when it was determined, and I don't know who determined it, but it was determined we should do that because kids should have a little exposure to French. So Minou was her name, and the Minou, the cat, arrived and threw everything off in terms of the very neat synchronicity we had. We had 2 hosts, 4 toys, so the writing of sequences was very straight ahead. Each one had 2. You could, suddenly you got 5 toys, 2 hosts, threw everything off, trying to figure out how to make everything. So Minou didn't last. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember. Minou started making like a cat, I'd like to add. Just came and went when she felt, at her own leisure. It had nothing to do with what we wanted. So
did you
appear and then disappear?
Did you give Minou the final axe?
Well, I'm trying. I can't remember. I would never take an axe to a cat, of course. I don't know. I probably did. I probably had it be more sporadic, but I don't remember. Honestly, I don't remember having Minou in too many of the shows I did.
Well, it's only been since my research that I've been enlightened to whom he knew was. I was under the impression, as you probably could have gathered by the way I asked that question, that it was something that you added perhaps towards the end of the series run. That's.
I think that one of the problems is if you're going to have a French character, people have to be able to speak French well.
Right.
And I think, for whatever reason, it just didn't, sometimes they'd be trying to speak French and it just didn't sound right, and that's worse than not having it at all. I don't know. A lot of things went into it, I think, but I think maybe we minimized her role in the show, I think.
Any other changes or things that are new that you remember?
Let's say one thing. By that time, there was a whole French channel on TV Ontario. TFO was going.
Right.
So they had their own great children's show. So it was, there wasn't quite the same imperative to do it.
Any other new components that you brought to the show during your time as the producer?
Honestly, not that I can remember. Apart from the redesigns of everything, I think certain things we were doing, we sort of expanded how you could tell the stories and stuff like that. And this would be driven by the fact you had no money to,
Right.
So you would do a game or a story where we're trying to find triangles, but the story is the toy, taking the snapshots, the toy's out, walking around the neighborhood, then how many triangles can you see, like above doors and things? Where can you see it? Or something like that. And we sent the toys, I think that story-wise, that was our big thing. We sent the toys on adventures. So you would have, of course, they were still photographs because, you can't really, I think they were all still. Maybe we did shoot a few. But anyway, they'd go to the horse farm. They'd do something. We'd send toys on adventures. That was a little wrinkle we threw in. But really, we didn't, I don't think I did much else that was drastic.
Now, we talked a little bit of this in person when we had lunch a few days ago. The dollhouse that the dolls would be taken out of while they were having the Hello song on Treasure Day, and the dollhouse that they would subsequently be put to bed on Finding Out Day, that was part of the whole thing before you took over?
I think it was. I don't think they sang the songs.
Okay.
If they did, I wrote the songs, and then they just ran them across every Treasure Day and Finding Out Day. But I think that was part of it. I think it was the introduction of the toys on the Monday and the putting away on the Friday. I think that was already built in. I think it was the way of introducing them on the Monday. One by one, they get a little thing, and then you put them away on the Friday, kind of signifying the end of the week. That's my recollection, anyway.
Did Ted ever stop by or offer any guidance during the taping of your first shows, offering any suggestions or opinions?
I don't remember Ted ever stopping by. He may have come by once, but I don't remember him coming by or offering suggestions. I say he may have, but I think really it was really a pretty clean shift, and I know Johnny or somebody said they thought he was there. I don't remember him. He wasn't there for any auditions. That's for certain. And I don't know. I really don't know if he came by once, maybe. But in my recollection anyway is we were pretty much doing our own thing.
Now, you worked with a multitude of hosts. Do you feel that hosts changed as much under your direction as the producer as they were during Ted's time? And did you carry over any hosts that had worked for Ted?
Cindy Cook I carried over. Cindy was one of the iconic hosts of Polka Dot Door. She's fantastic. Love her. She was very, very popular. She did a great job, and kids loved her. And she was also great to work with, very prepared and really knew the show. So she was slam dunk brought over. I don't think, in the first year, I may have. It's hard for me to believe I would have recast the entire thing the first year, but maybe I did. I don't know. I think by the second year, the second series we did, I think I'd pretty well just kept Cindy. Everybody else was new. But I can't really remember.
How did you scout out hosts and hire them, and how are they chosen?
They were largely brought to us by George Bourne. George Bourne was the talent coordinator, as I mentioned earlier, and he would get in touch with agents and say we're looking for people for this show, and then they get names, and we just have auditions and bring people in.
Of all the hosts that you worked with, who were some of the most memorable and effective personalities on camera?
Well, I think if they lasted for for a while, I thought they were great. Carrie Loring, Cindy Cook, of course, Carrie Loring, Johnny Chase. Did Johnny Chase and Carrie both? I think I'm right in saying I probably hired them in '85, and I think they worked every year. Both of them worked on shows every year that I was doing. They were both really, really fantastic. Jim Codrington, he had an impact. I mean, there were a lot. There's a guy named Christopher Trace who was terrific, but he left. He left the show. You should rhyme names off. That's better. I'm bad. I said I'm always worried about names. I'll leave people off.
Was the woman who went on to be a correspondent for Global, was it Sherry Miller? Was she during your time?
No, she was before me.
Okay. Help us.
But I'm going to throw Gloria Rubin in only because she went on to tremendous success in TV, and I think we were the first show she worked on. So
wow,
she was good. She was the stepsister, half-sister of Dennis Simpson, who was in Ted's time, fantastic host who everybody loved, and a great theatrical person everybody loved. And she had his charisma and his charm. Boy, she was fantastic too.
It's good. Help us understand how the show was actually shot. Did you shoot in blocks of episodes, and how many at a time, and where did that happen?
Well, one of the things that I really believed in was rehearsal prior to studio, because I thought you saved a lot of studio time the more you could work out, in a church gym or somewhere.
Right.
So we would bring everybody in. We would do that. Find usually a church gym or something like that. Excuse me. And we would rehearse there first of all. Maybe I think 6 weeks or so ahead of actual studio time. John Arpin, the piano player, it's this virtuoso piano player, a wonderful, unbelievably talented man. He would come in, run all the songs, so you could work out the songs, the harmonies, the keys. You'd try everything out, run the scripts, and then you could start trimming the scripts and bringing them closer to time. The whole goal of doing the rehearsal, right? So you're already kind of working at how we're going to shoot, where you'll be, how we'll do it, and that, all the cast members had that information pretty early on, and that was important because once we got to the studio, you had 5 days to shoot 5 shows. However, we only shot for 3 days. So the first 2 days were rehearsal with camera, and you went through, again, everything, we did it back to front. So you'd start on the Finding Out Day, which is the Friday show, and rehearse up to the Treasure Day, and really fine-tune how we're going to do it. Again, you're timing the scripts. If we're going to make cuts, we make them there. We find out it actually takes twice as long to make this little castle we're making. Okay, so we'll adjust that. Excuse me. And then we shot 5 shows in 3 days, starting with the Monday show and going to the Friday show. Very intense for the cast.
How many episodes were in a season, and were they all recorded on Betamax during your time as producer?
Each season would vary. So probably the minimum number we did, I think based on budget concerns and stuff, I think the minimum we did was probably 20. We might have done 15, but once you're getting down to 15, you might as well just wait and do more than that's a lot of work for 15 shows. But certainly 20, 25. We might have done 30 one year. Some usually 20 or 25, I think. What we were on, whether we were on Betamax or 2-inch, I have no idea. I don't think we're on Betamax, but you have to talk to David Moore or somebody.
What were there any ever years where you didn't produce anything and you doubled up the year after?
I don't think so. I know we did two. We did 2 very quickly back to back in the first year, and I think after that it was always once a year.
Was there any Polka Dot Door merchandising done during your time as producer?
Well, I think they were always doing some. As they always seemed to have like a book out, or when Ted they released 4 books with Anik Press, I think, and it's on the surface of it. And they did the record, which you saw, and I don't know. I think they did some jigsaw puzzles and some activity games and things like that for Polka Dot Door, and subsequently Polka Dot Shorts had the same characters. They were also doing merchandising for. I always thought the things that Polka Dot Door had, they had a lot of original stories that were written for that show. Many of which seemed to me to deserve to be little books, and a lot of music, a lot of original songs. Not just me, but other people were writing for the show. Seemed to me they had a treasure trove of stuff. Not to mention, by the way, Today's Special and Join In and Heather's shows and all the rest. There's a lot of songs written for TVO shows which now have vanished basically, and there's probably a few. There you go. There's $1 million idea for you, Travis. Go mine that motherlode and make some records.
Put together a compilation, the best of TV Ontario. That's not a foreign thought. My colleague Ed Conroy has wanted to do something like that. Tell me a little bit about the philosophy of Polka Dot Door as you saw. What were you trying to accomplish through that show, and how were you going about it?
Well, for me, I wanted it to be a show that said yes to kids in everything. So it was very important to me that no matter what you tried or what you wanted to try, the show was saying, try it. Because you would often read about kids or people who say, well, I wanted to dance, and somebody would say, oh, boys don't dance, or dancing is sissy. I'm just using that as an example.
Right.
But all sorts of things where people would say no, and I thought, the creative instinct in kids and the instinct to do things, it's there right from the earliest age, and it should be fostered and nourished. So on the show, we tried to make sure that every sequence we were doing was saying yes to kids. Like, sing with us. Don't say you've got a bad voice. How many people do you know? If you say, hey, let's sing this song, say, oh, no, I can't sing, I got a bad voice. That's really, no. Yes, you may not be an opera star, but you can sing. And so we wanted to get kids everything, whether it's movement or singing or crafts or whatever we were doing, to say yes. We're saying yes. And we also wanted to open up the idea of curiosity about a lot of things. So already we're trying to say, be curious about it all, about how peanuts become peanut butter, and about the solar system, and about, how cars are made, or whatever. So those are probably the two major thrusts, plus the ones that were there from before, which was that this was a show which we were trying to do for the widest spectrum of kids in the widest situation possible.
Why do you think Polka Dot Door has been such an incredible success?
Well, Polka Dot Door, one thing we did when we were doing the show, we never tried to appeal to anybody over 5. The show was not scripted over 5. The pacing, nothing, not a thing. If you look at the show and you see how it's shot very, I'll say, calmly. The way that the cuts are done very, it's a calm kind of shooting. It's not fast cuts. It's not being clever. It's not the director trying to say, hey, watch how I can be really, real smart here. It's done in a very measured way. And that was all part of the show. The idea was, people would say, well, kids can't concentrate for more than 3 minutes. So you got to move the show along, make it snappy. And my attitude was, well, it's adults who can't concentrate.
Right.
Kids have no problem at all. And so we made sure that was a key part of it, that we were doing things in that way, sort of at the kids' pace. And I think that's one of the reasons it worked. I think kids intuitively knew it was for them. And we could get into subject a little more depth. If we were going to do jazz, we didn't feel we had to get out of there in 2.5 minutes. We had Jane Bennett, as we chatted with you about, and she could talk about it, and we could show examples, and we could take that further. And the feedback we get from parents, and I used to have parents who would say to me, well, my child loves Adora, but I can't stand it. And I said, well, we're not writing it for you. So it's okay. We're writing it for your child, however. So I'm very happy they like it and they can stay with it. And they do. That was the point. They stayed with it. And I think that's one reason it worked so well. It had such a long-lasting impact. You know, at one time, in about 95, when the TV world had exploded, so it really was competition at dinner hour, Family Ties and whatever. I mean, you really had heavy competition. And TVO had 3 of the top 10 shows at the dinner hour. Book Mice, Polka Dot Shorts, and Polka Dot Door, I think.
Wow.
But that's what the shows were doing. You know, kids, I think, really. Oh, well, you know, you were a kid. You thought it was for you. I mean, you were entertained by it, and you fought. I don't know, but that's my take on it.
You know, one of the things that was also iconic about the show was having a person of color as well as a Caucasian host. Was that idea inherited by Ted, or was that something that you brought to the table?
No, I think Ted had started that already. I think the change with me was that, you know, when I was in '85, I was aware that the world was really becoming multicultural. And when the kids who were had grown up, and I started projecting 20 years, my feeling was the world that they were in was going to be the world, in fact, we're in, a really multicultural world. So we had to already start showing people together, you know, there's no big deal, it's just people together and they're friends, and you don't deal about it. That's what we wanted to do. So we introduced you know, some Asians and some East Indian. We ramped up, I think, the pool that we're using to cast. And generally speaking, I always tried to make sure there were, you know, 2 different people of 2 different backgrounds were together. I'm not sure I did that all the time, but generally that was what I was doing. And I think that was building on what Ted did. I don't know that Ted did that all. I know it had already started during his time.
We were talking a little bit about Polkaroo earlier. During your run, because I know I've since found out that this was not the case in the early first couple of years, but during your run, was it always the male host in the Polkaroo costume?
Well, first of all, are you sure there was a male host in any costume, Travis, really? Or is that what we're just telling you?
No, Nina Keogh tells me that she was in that costume and Gordon Thompson was doing scenes with Polkaroo, and we have the pictures to show that. And we have Nina's testimony. So I think that's pretty conclusive evidence.
Is it just that the adult mind needs to know and needs to have a reason?
Well, you know, it's one of those folklore things about, you know, Polka Dot Door that you, at least during my era, that it was always the male host inside. Can you confirm or deny?
But Cindy Cook saw the Polkaroo.
Cindy Cook saw the Polkaroo. Okay. You'll leave it at that?
What more is there to say?
I guess that does answer my question. Now, although you did change a lot on the set of Polka Dot Door, and we've talked about that, all the changes that happened through the years, you did maintain the rather retro-looking opening and closing animation. And I know we briefly chatted about this in person, but remind me again, was there any reason for that? Like, I guess it just seemed that it worked, but you have to admit, like anybody who watches the episodes from the 80s or 90s, it's a bit of a throwback when the show starts and ends, because it's like, what is this? How does this fit in?
Yeah, you know, I know that we talked about I wouldn't have changed it, but I would have bumped the color up or something. I'm surprised we didn't, but maybe we didn't. I can't remember. I thought we did, but otherwise, there was nothing to change as far as I was concerned. The song was perfect. And, you know, these shows, because they're in such rotation, you're only doing 20 shows a year, let's say, and you're showing the thing 2 times a day, 365 days a year. So, you know, what is that? There's 700 plus shows on air, and they're from all these different eras. Having a new theme suddenly show up, which would be like once every, 4 weeks or something, wouldn't make sense. But beyond that, the theme was perfect. Simple. It set the tone for the show, which is a very simple instrumentation. The singer's voice, the whole thing. It set the show up beautifully, and the closing too. So I didn't see any reason to change that.
Did you know, $1 million question, because nobody can seem to remember. Do you know who sung the original theme?
Sadly, I don't.
Do you know any of the set designers who created some of the iconic things on the set, like the door and the storytime clock and the actual toys?
Peggy might know that, or Ruth. I don't. I don't know who. I know I remember it. I heard Peggy. I saw her interview, and she mentioned it too. That Marigold, or one of them, was like a friend's daughter. I don't.
Well, it was her doll. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just say I have no idea who did. I know the set. Chris Aidney was the fellow who did all the set changes that I did. He was the on staff. It's like a marvelous man, and he designed, I think, all the sets for shows in that era. I think I'm safe in saying in '85 on, and probably before that. So he was the one who did the designs for how we altered the set when I was there. I don't know who did it before.
And did the toys ever need to be updated or replaced? And would there just be someone on staff with a needle and thread that would take care of that?
It's yes to both. You would need to sew up the little H on Humpty's belt buckle, or from time to time for sure. But we actually rebuilt all the toys at some point in my tenure.
And were they basically just, you gave them the old ones and said, hey, I need you to find something that looks similar to this and rebuild these toys?
Yeah, well, actually I think Ethel Leonard was responsible for it, I believe, who was kind of the head for Polka Dot Door. She did props and wardrobe. And actually, she worked in every show I did. She's another fantastic. There's so many people who are so fantastic. I hate mentioning names, I forget them all, but or I'll forget some. But Ethel, I think, it was time. I mean, these things have been used for a number of years. They're starting to look a bit ratty, and you can see it on TV. So it was time to redo them with better material that looked fresher, better. And when you're doing that, you can again find colors that maybe have a little more punch to them and are going to work with the new set that we're doing. So that we did that somewhere in the 80s, probably.
And where did all these props end up? Did you retain anything, or did anybody could just anybody just when the show ceased production just, hey, I'm going to take Marigold home and sell her on eBay?
I have no idea. I don't think that was going to happen. I would say that they would have been archived because you just never know when you might use them again, I'm guessing. I don't know where the Storytime chair or the Storytime clock, or where the treasure chest or the dollhouse, or I have no idea. I would assume they're still in the archive somewhere.
But I think you do know where Storytime Mouse is.
I know where Storytime Mouse is, certainly. I do. Storytime Mouse. Would you like to know what you know? Storytime Mouse was given to me. Where I got some.
And that's the one. Now, would that have been the same one that was used in the 70s too?
It's possible, but seems unlikely. But it might be. It might be.
Where did you obtain the films that were used through the Polka Dot Door sequences?
TVO had a film research department, a great, very, hard-working and dedicated bunch. And for Polka Dot Door, unfortunately, we had no money. So for us, they had to find films that were free. There was a woman named Peggy Buckley kind of headed it up, and then we would have different researchers, for each episode we did, each series that we did. So we would give them what we were looking for, and then they would research, and find films that we could not pay for, and then could show in perpetuity for free. And we might pay like $100 or something, but we didn't have any money, so that's where we got the films, and they did a great job.
Would you ever be bound by the types of shows that you could do based on the films that were available, or vice versa? No? Okay. What types of things were you doing on the Polka Dot Door that made it uniquely Canadian?
Well, all our references were, little things. The references we used were all things that we knew were Canadian. So we didn't, if there was let's say some kind of a history reference, that would be Canadian. But it would even be what birds we're going to see in the backyard. We'd be sure, they're the birds you will see in the backyard. We're not just making something up that you aren't going to see if you're in a certain part of the country. It was really more stuff like that. Anything that we shot, obviously would, you'd know that you were in Canada. And we'd if we did a map thing, it would be Canada. It was just all that sort of stuff.
We talked about how you're a composer for the show as well, and you talked about, having written the hello song and the goodbye song used on both ends of the weeks, and Were there any other iconic songs that were used over and over again that you had composed, either for Ted's series or for the series that you produced?
Well, I wish I'd written the theme, which I didn't, and I wish I'd written Imagine, Imagine, which I think is a beautiful song.
Right.
We would redo the lyrics every time to fit whatever we were doing with the show. I love that tune. I really do. I think that was a genius tune, but I didn't write that. And you know what?
Do you know who wrote it?
I'm not so sure Pat Patterson or somebody did. I don't really know them. I don't. It might have been Herbie Helbig too. Herbie Helbig wrote a couple things that lasted quite a while. There was a song that was called Da Ba Da Ba Ba Da. You know that one? How did you do Pokeroo or something?
Yeah. How do you do Pokeroo?
I think Herbie Helbig wrote that.
Very good. Very good. What are some of the challenges of both producing and administrating a show while at the same time writing and composing for it? Because here you are kind of putting together the team. Now, granted, as you said, it was often off the same team established already for you, but what were some of the challenges of actually calling a lot of the administration shots as producer as well as writing and composing for a show?
Well, it actually makes it easier.
Really?
Because you can make decisions that benefit the writing. You know, I mean, you aren't trying to convince someone else, let's say, to do something, because you're the person you have to convince. So you say, well, what do you think? Should we do this? Yeah, good idea, Jed. All right, let's do it then. I mean, it makes it easier. It doesn't make it more challenging. And beyond that, having as I said, the support staff and the crew. I mean, having David direct most of them, and having Carol, who knew the show so well, just makes such a difference. It makes it so much easier, you know. In fact, they might say, "Well, are you sure you want to do that?" And I go, "Oh yeah, you're right. We can't." You know, I mean, that's kind of how it works. It's really a team. It isn't me, or it's not one person. And I was fortunate on not only The Door, but every show, like I said, to have a team that was fantastic. And beyond the little production team, then you have the people. You know, a show like Today's Special had Wendy Jones, Michelle Maurice, had Marnie Malabar, and somebody, but they were kind of the support staff for Clyde, but they made it easier for you as a writer as well. You know, you can't do it without that kind of support behind you. Then you go to the crew that are shooting. I mean, as I said, it's a big team effort, and that's how it works. So really, everything was made easier by having people like that on board, I thought.
Did you sense at the time that you were helping create a huge cultural phenomenon? And how does it feel to be part of a team that created one of the most beloved children television shows in Canada?
Well, at the time, no, because you're in the middle of it, you know, so you're just doing it. And I don't think when I was writing it in the 70s, I don't think I had any idea. You know, I was doing other things too. You know, I was doing homemade television for 3 of the years I was writing Polka Dot Door. I was just doing a bunch of stuff, performing, and, you know. So I wasn't aware of it. Where I became aware of the power of Polka Dot Door was I'd written one of the live shows, and they were doing it at, it must have been March break, or that's my recollection, March break, maybe at some shopping mall, Sheridan Mall or something.
Right.
So we're doing it all week, 2 shows a day. And it's Monday morning, and we thought, well, the Monday morning show is really going to be our kind of run-through show. It won't be much of a crowd. We haven't, we've rehearsed it, but you want to have that show where you can fine-tune it. So that's great. It'll be, attended by a very small group. It's Monday morning, and it's cold and damp and everything else. And we got there, and there must have been 600 kids there, at like an hour before. And we weren't going to be able to do anything. So we probably got there at 8:30. It was probably at 10, and it was already... performance area was jammed. And that's the first time I realized this show is bigger than I was aware of. And when we finished the first show, the lineup had started for the second show. And, these shows were only 45 minutes long probably. So I realized they're going to line up at 11:15 for a show at 2 o'clock. Okay, this is bigger, this is bigger than I thought. But apart from that, I don't think you really have any idea. I don't think any of us really thought about it. I really don't.
Now,
when I hear someone like you or anybody I talk to who says how much they liked it and it meant to them, then you think, well, that's great. But while you're doing it, you're just doing it. It's
a
fun
job, yeah. Where all did it go? Because I've heard stories that it was given away to third world countries for free, and that people learned to speak English by listening to it, and that it was, I know it was on PBS stations in the States, and I know Access Alberta had rights to it. What is your awareness of how far it actually went out?
I think it went pretty well across Canada through the various educational agencies. It was the first Canadian children's show to be commercially syndicated in the U.S., as opposed to going to another educational channel in the U.S. It was commercially syndicated. They tried that out. It didn't work because the channels said, I can run Family Ties for less money than I would pay you guys or whatever, and I get a bigger audience. So, there was no mention made of it's good for kids, and that's what I mean. The atmosphere when these things were being done, and the general broadcasting was, well, why should I show this thing at 5:30? My God, if I run Family Ties reruns, I'm going to have triple the audience. So why should I show it?
Right.
So it didn't work commercially that way. It certainly sold in many, many countries around the world, because in Botswana and Namibia, and you'd see that sort of thing from time to time. Generally speaking, countries are very protective of their preschool children. So it's not so easy to sell a preschool show, because everybody has their cultural things and the things that they want for their kids in their country. But it did sell very well. But you touched on something that I did hear from people, which was that not only in other countries, but in Toronto, because the show's language was so precise and the vocabulary was so basic, people who had newly immigrated to Canada and to Toronto would watch the show and could learn English from watching the show. But beyond that, they would also see, if you're having the tea party with the toys, and you're saying, it's all the please and thank you, it's all the little cultural things about how you do that. And that's what the show did. I mean, the show's motto, I don't know who came up with this. If it was me, I don't think I did, but someone probably did somewhere. Anyway, it's learning through play. So everything's a game. Everything's fun. You're playing tea party. But while you're doing that, as they do it, you're learning language, you're learning the social skill of, would you like this? No, thank you. Oh, okay, would you like, all the little things like that you're learning as you go along. So I know people have told me that they used it to, learn English, to help them learn English when they come to Canada.
When was the last time that you saw an episode of Polka Dot Door that you produced, and did you ever retain anything from the show, aside from the videos and pictures that you passed on to me, such as any scripts or anything, even from the 70s when you were writing then?
I am the world's worst archival person. I don't keep the things, and so I don't know. The last show that I would watch the show. Probably the last show that I produced was probably the last year it was produced. 93 or something. I didn't keep scripts particularly on purpose anyway, because first of all, these things are all in theory being archived by TVO, so I didn't really see. There's no point for me. My script would be, everybody had written stuff all over them anyway as we're editing on the floor and doing stuff as we were going. So no, I do. I think I have a copy of one of the live shows I wrote for Gary Richardson when he was producing them, and I think I've got a script for the first special we did, the birthday party one. And I think I may have a script for the second one that goes to camp. That was written by Laurie Hauser, who wrote Laurie Fleming, I should say. I think her name is now. Who wrote a lot of great scripts for all the shows. No, not much else, sadly. But that's just because I'm a terrible, terrible archivist.
A couple of wrap-up questions as we begin, and this is your first step into becoming a better archivist by conducting this interview. So there you go.
Yeah.
Make you feel a little bit better about that.
Yeah.
When you think back at Polka Dot Door, what are you most proud of?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough question. I don't know if I can even really answer that. I'm just proud of the job that we all did to make the show what it was, and that it worked so well. I think that's about it.
Favorite memory from doing the show? We talked about a lot of things about, pets attacking each other, people holding books upside down and letting a cuss out. What are some of your favorite memories of the show? It sounded like you guys had a lot of fun.
We did. I had fun in every show I did. That's one reason I kept doing it. I think that for me, the funny thing was it's never seemed like work. Like work.
Right.
Like I said, I was writing songs and making up stories when I was 10 or 9. And as far as I'm concerned, I just kept on doing it and kept on doing it, and then that's all I've done. So it's always been fun. And I think for me, the thing about, apart from the story that everyone is telling you about the animals, the day that the guinea pig attacked Barney the rabbit.
Multiple times, because I'm now seeing that these people that told me this story are different from the clips that I actually have from a tape from you of outtakes with different hosts. So this must have been a somewhat regular occurrence that Bunny and GP got into it.
Well, I don't think it was. I may be wrong because I don't remember. Dave, if you've talked to David Moore, if you do, he may remember. But the one, you have a clip on outtake reel, I think, probably.
Yeah.
Of the actual one that everyone's referring to that I remember.
Okay, gotcha.
So, my memory is that they were singing some friendship song while this all happened. That may or may not be true. And that's what it's become in my mind, and they're singing, Barney has a special friend and GP is his name, while GP is trying to kill Barney on the camera. But the host looking up here can't see it. And of course, as a host, you have to keep going till someone says cut. So the host is gamely singing, Barney has a special friend. And meanwhile, this is going on. And Barney's leaping back over the little thing, blood pouring from his ear. But, you've got the clip, so you know the truth of it. Now, we've all just got it and how we've embellished it in our memory. And apart from that, it's funny. Because I was with the shows from beginning to end, that's kind of my memory of it. I had that really, for me, privileged position of being in on it, all the series I did from start to finish. So you get to work with the writers, and we had just tremendous, every series, had some tremendous writers. Polka Dot Door had kind of its stable, and Join In and Polka Dot Shorts had their stable of writers. But it was so much fun to work with them. And then going on with the art, Joyce Cosby in the art department and the wardrobe and the props and David and Carol, and the way the show would grow and bring the crew in. And really, those are my memories. Is just how much fun it was. Again, I'm going to go back and say, Ruth is responsible. It was really fun. It didn't seem like work. We were working and the long hours and all the rest. I just had a blast the whole time, and that's really what I take away from it. Those are my significant memories.
As you are aware, TVO hasn't been exactly quick to make available to the public many of the shows that you created and wrote for. What are your thoughts on this? And do you feel like your work is being adequately preserved and made available for future generations? If I were to get a statement from you, what would you say?
Well, I'd say the evidence is that the answer is no. It's not being presented to the public, and no one can get at it, actually. And TVO, as I've said, TVO, I think, has a wealth of stuff. We know they do. I don't know they do, but a lot of wonderful things were created by TVO and with very talented people. And certainly in the field of preschool children's shows, some of them are going to look dated now. They can't help it. They're written 30 years ago, produced 30 years ago. But there is a lot of material there, which is fantastic. And it would just seem that now with, a lot of other things, as you know, if you want to start trolling YouTube, you can find a lot of stuff that you thought would be long gone. And this includes episodes of shows from the 50s. I'm amazed what you can dig up online. And how much fun is that to see something from when you were a kid, and you say, oh my gosh. I'm still looking for the original Peter Pan, which I've heard is impossible, but I figure, maybe somehow, someday, somewhere. So yeah, TVO, it's not so much to be critical of TVO. There's a budget and there's things, and there's only so much money to spend around, and time and people and all the rest. But if there was a way that you could mine, like I said, that mother lode of, for me, in the kids thing, not just the TV shows, but the stories and the songs that you could spin off from them, and some other things you could spin off from them, games and all the rest. That would make sense to me, but that's just my take on it.
We're going to do a little bit of a name association, and this is the part of the interview where I'm going to give you a name, and all I'm looking for is just, maybe some statements, maybe one or two quick sentences of your memories of these people. Now, some of these we've talked about in the previous interview, but we'll review them again, and you can just kind of give me one or two statements about what you remember about these people. So we'll go through this list. First name, Clive Vanderberg.
Well, as I said, inspirational, template for being a producer of a show, huge impact on all children's television, educational television, 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, from his tenure on, and a multi and mega talented and a wonderful guy.
Carrie Loring.
Marvelous person, lover, great singer, very, very funny, warm, just perfect host for Polka Dot Door. But beyond that, she's just a fantastic person.
Bob Dermer.
Bob Dermer, hysterically funny. Again, very, very, very talented puppeteer. Just created a character particularly with Sam Crenshaw. He's done more, but Sam Crenshaw particularly, that has lived on and just indelibly created that character. Brilliant guy.
Noreen Virgin.
Noreen Virgin is another. Her role specifically on today's special. You know what? Quickly jumping, because rather than going to go through all of them, Noreen, Bobby, Nina, and Jeff created icons in the minds of the children who saw the show. Each one of them brought tremendous talent to what they're doing. Nina as Muffy, honestly, how fantastic is that? Noreen as being the kind of, you want to say kind of mother figure on the show, the calm center while all this other stuff is going on around. How perfect was she? She was phenomenal. And Jeff, what can you say? The talents that he brought to the show, and having kids identify with him, as the mannequin who doesn't know all these things, it's phenomenal. Robin Hale was the computer. Robin Hale still has people who know her just from her voice. Wow. This is an iconic show in the way that every character on it, the main characters, all are locked in the minds of any child who saw the show. It's fantastic. So all of them, I I couldn't tip my hat enough to her praising them.
Carol Jones.
Carol Jones, I go speech. Carol Jones, I could not have done what I did, certainly, without Carol. Carol is just the most marvelous person. She was on top of so much for the shows. I can't imagine doing them without her. And beyond that, her spirit and her sense of humor, always, it's important when you're doing a show, and you know this too, when you're doing shows, there's always times when it's getting a little tense or something isn't happening and the clock is ticking, and it's not like you're having a cakewalk in there. And right. Carol is the sort of person who just roll with it, could make you laugh, was really, really, really good at what she did, and absolutely essential. Carol, not only did she do Polka Dot Door, but she also worked on Polka Dot Shorts, and the two of them, very different shows. I just can't imagine. She's, I don't even know what I'd say, an indelible part of my working career. I couldn't say enough good about Carol.
Clive Endersby.
Well, Clive, like I said, Clive is a phenomenal writer. So very talented. He was an actor, then writer. And I think he and Clive Vanderberg, for me, I see them as being the two that really broke open educational TV for kids. Clive, very funny, great sense of humor. His shows are always very playful. They really flow easily. They go really nicely along the way he constructs his shows. I think he's one of the best children's writers I've ever met or gotten to know. And I'd say in a way sort of inspiring to other writers. I used to go in, and Clive doesn't know this, so he ever sees this, that'd be separate. I used to go in and study his shows. On today's special, I'd go in and watch them, and I'd see what he was doing and how he was doing it, because I was really, really impressed with what he was doing. But he had started earlier with Clive Vanderberg. I believe he started on a math show or something, and math is a subject that I could never get as a kid. When I saw what they were doing, how much fun it blew me away, and then you really knew that Clive Endersby was a really special writer.
Heather Conkey.
Heather, Heather's also, I mean, I knew her as a very, very talented person who's working at TV Ontario. She kind of had her own universe, though. In a sense, I was kind of doing my stuff and she was doing her stuff. She kept churning out these fantastic shows, one after the other, I mean, there's Report Canada streaming, but, Dear Aunt Agnes, and I think it was called The Music Box, and she really, really was great. But I got to say, we see each other, but she wasn't so much in my universe, or I wasn't so much in hers.
We've talked about her a lot, but Ruth Vernon.
Well, just to reiterate and repeat, Ruth is the top of that pinnacle for me at TV Ontario. Created what I saw was an ideal working environment. She was supportive, as I said. She was knowledgeable, supportive, fair. She was fun. I can't imagine a better boss. I think that, along with everything else, the reason it was so much fun to work there, I think, and creatively, you know yourself. I mean, you get a bunch of creative types together. It's not that we're all going to be best buddies necessarily. It's just creative people are kind of interesting people to be around. But she created the ambience for all of us, for everybody to be there. And I think that I can't imagine a better, as I said before, I cannot imagine someone being a better boss. I really can't. She's the absolute best.
Al Fazan.
Well, Al, I knew peripherally. Al's, he was there certainly while I was there, and I have to admit, I liked Al. I didn't see Al very much. We knew each other, but at a certain point, when you're there, and you're going in and doing your shows, people are there and you don't have so much contact with them because what their area of responsibility is something else rather than your show and what you're doing. So Al, great guy. I liked him a lot, but we didn't interact creatively.
Peter Newman.
Peter Newman, again, as I think anybody who produced or worked on a show will tell you, you could not imagine a better floor director. Not only is he just a great guy, I mean, he and I like to talk music a lot. He had worked in Britain some of the Ready Steady Go shows when Otis Redding and those guys showed up over in Britain. He was working the floor when they were doing their. He worked at a lot of the British acts, so I loved hearing those stories, as you might imagine. Great man, warm, great spirit, great energy, and under the pressure of TV production, when the control room is over there, he's actually on the floor. It's the sort of thing where, some director might say, "Can't you tell them to get the director's about to go apoplectic over something that's now gone for the umpteenth time, And, Peter would say, they're wondering if you wouldn't mind just doing it one more time, He could just translate it to the cast so they wouldn't ever sort of feel sometimes the pressure that's going on behind the thing as you're, all those things you're trying to go through to make the show happen.
It sounds like a very, very valuable aspect to have a person who can handle that.
Not just valuable, he was invaluable.
Wow.
He had a director's mind. So when you were rehearsing, and he's there, he was the sort of person who could say, do you think it would be better, let's say you've got 3 cameras, so he's the sort of guy that might say from time to time, if you actually started on 2 but then cut to 3, would that help us better when the person's got to go over there after he'd seen how you were blocking it? So he had his mind, he wouldn't impose it at all, but having someone like that as a resource to help out, as I said, I keep saying over and over, it's just this big team. It was invaluable.
Cindy Cook.
Cindy Cook, just great episode Polka Dot Door had, fantastic personality on screen. He's marvelous. I mean,
sorry, can you say that last part again? I think the audio cut out.
Cindy Cook was one of our top hosts, on Polka Dot Door. But beyond this, it's really a one person.
Johnny Chase.
Johnny Chase was the other sort of pillar of my Polka Dot Door hosts. Again, very warm, very personable, very friendly. Just had the complete right charisma for the show. Kids loved him. Really good singer. And of course, T and Carrie, their blend singing I loved, so I used them a lot. Johnny was one of the mainstays for me.
Jennifer Harvey.
Jennifer Harvey is sort of behind the scenes, producer behind the scenes, and she was terrific. Jennifer was really fun. I worked with her on, I think, Telefrancais, You Can Write Anything, Calling All Safety Scouts, and I may be missing something in there. She was part of the team. This was Ruth's team, the people that were there, the creative people, and the producers who were making shows. And so you're always in contact with each other, and she was another integral part of it. It's just a wonderful person.
Now, I don't know if you ever met him, but the creator of TV Ontario, Ran Eyed.
Never met Ran. I just knew him by name.
Peter Herndorf.
Herndorf?
Yes, pardon me.
Yeah, Peter came in as the head of TVO in the 90s, and that's when things changed in the whole structure. He was from a news background, so he really pumped up the news side of it, which is still a part, as far as I can see, it's a big part of their thing. That was his specialty. He'd won awards for that, I think, at CBC, and so he brought that to TVO, and that was a sort of part of the changeover from Ruth to Adrian Mills. Was all part of that came just after Peter came. I can't say much more. He certainly did what he was doing. I think that there was probably perceived a necessity. It's one thing to have everyone say, we love your children's programming. And now you're in the 90s with all these cable channels, and you've got to get you've got Saturday Night at the Movies, and you've got kids shows. But what else have you got that's going to bring in a big, you've got to find a way. And so I think as I understand it, he was trying to find that thing that will bring in adult viewers and therefore donations and everything else. And that was going to be seen through news and current affairs. So that was his contribution.
Two more names, and I know I'm going to get the last name pronounced wrong, but Susan Murgatroyd, am I saying that right?
Susan Murgatroyd is a director. She's a writer as well. I think she directed maybe 2 years with Ted. If you talk to her, you can ask her. She was certainly, she directed, and again, she went on to a very successful career as a freelance director.
And finally, your friend John Arpin. Oh, sorry, I missed that last comment about Susan. I'm sorry.
She was probably going on to be a producer-director. She's very, very, very capable and talented.
And then finally, the last name is your friend John Arpin.
Oh, well, John Arpin was, I think it's the only person who I would say is a virtuoso, a musical genius. John had a spirit that it's very hard to define. You know what? Friendly to every. He could play anything, and I'm talking about opera to country music. He could play the repertoire of Elton John at a drop of a hat. He could play full opera scores at a drop of a hat. He had a huge collection of music from the 1890s, 1880s, 1890s. He could probably play all of it from memory. He was a genius at ragtime, and in fact won I think it's W.C. Handy Award for ragtime piano playing, and had concertos written for him to play. And he could bring to our show. On our show, it's just the piano. It got to seem so retro because everybody was using full band tracks, about the 80s. But as a musician, you listen to what he was doing. You listen to his transitions, his harmonies, the stuff he was doing. It was perfect. It was perfect. And beyond that, John had the sort of skill. When we did the film sequences, we did them. His track was done separately to those because we had to edit them and time them and everything else. So he would walk in, and I think we did 5. And these were each 5 minutes long. So he'd walk in, and we'd sit there, we'd watch the film together, and he would say to me, well, what do you hear, and I would say, well, I think I'm hearing kind of Haydn, but country and western. He would take that, complete gibber-jabber and say, okay, kind of like a little, and I'd say, yeah, something like that. He said, okay. So John had to come in 3 seconds after the film started to allow for the door transition, and he had to be out 3 seconds before the door closed. So you'd give him those 2 time codes, roll the film, John would start to play. He played a musically coherent piece of music. If you listen to it, he would catch little things that were happening. When the wheels turned and something tumbled down, he'd tumble down with it or whatever. And he would finish coherent, not finish it, musically, coherently. The thematic material he had ended at 3 seconds before the time code ran out. It was jaw-dropping, particularly for me with some music background. You know, going, I can't even understand that talent. And John spoke so gracefully. If you met him, he just as soon talk baseball. You know, I can hardly begin to tell you what a phenomenal talent and person he was, and another integral part of the team that we had doing the door. I can't imagine it without him. He was, I get teary in a moment. He was fantastic.
Wow. Well, you know, Jed, this has been exhaustive, and I just want to say thank you for taking the large amount of time you've taken this afternoon to really put in a time capsule what I believe is very important, and what I've given my life to, at least as a hobby, to preserve the memory of you. And you know what? We've only really scratched the surface of everything that you've accomplished. And I know that many that are watching this are thankful for your significant contributions to Canadian educational television. And I just want to personally thank you for your investment in the lives of so many. You know, being an educator myself, you know, I look at my career and I may be able to influence hundreds, maybe thousands of people, but the reality of what you have done with these shows is that you have taught and you have educated millions of people all over the world. And I think that is an incredible legacy that ought to be acknowledged and that ought to be honored. So thank you so much for what you've given your life to. I think it's incredible.
Well, Travis, I mean, truthfully, it was a real pleasure. You know, it was just fun. And anyway,
good stuff. Well, I know we'll talk a little bit offline here, but thank you again for doing this interview, and I hope you have a wonderful Christmas.